Welcome everybody to, I guess, the first episode, in the series of Energy Transformation Hour. And we're going to be looking at various aspects that affect the transformation of energy in Puerto Rico. And I want to make a warm welcome to our first guest, very important, Tomás Torres Placa. He, for those of you who don't know, and I think actually everybody on here who will, but in case we decide to release this video recording, for those who don't know who Tomás Torres Placa is, he's an engineer with over 30 years of experience. He has a master's degree in planning from the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras. He was formerly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I know you were with the Asociación Industriales. I think you were the executive director, but in any event, for a number of years. He also, until recently, was the executive director of the ICSE, the Institute for Competitiveness and Sustainable Economy. And he is the consumer representative to the board of Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, or AEE. Thomas, welcome. We're going to be talking, based on our conversations, about a handful of issues. Probably lead among them is the LUMA contract and the a good handful of deficiencies, improvements, I think, that we've all spotted that can be made to that contract and should be made. I think also we're going to touch on the recent performance review and the 10-year plan with PREPA and maybe other things if we have time. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you very much for the great audience we have tonight. Just a little bit clarification. I was the Energy Committee leader. I was the Energy Committee president for 3 years, 1 year vice president and 2 years president of the Energy Committee of the PRMA.
Okay, great.
Okay,
thanks for
great.
the clarification. Terrific.
Okay, so how you want to do this? Do I start? You want?
Yeah, I think we wanted to lead off. I think you have been outspoken in certainly from the beginning, but definitely this year, as things have begun to get going, about the particular changes, modifications, renegotiations that we'd like to see in the LUMA contract. And I think you have an audience that's I think on your sides, particularly in the legislature, but also in the governor's office, based on what we've heard. So why don't we start with that?
Thank you much. And after that, we can talk a little bit of the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau performance proceeding on PREPA. This is a performance proceeding beyond the proceeding of LUMA. It's very interesting. This started in 2016, and then the commission, the new bureau, kind of took over and put another docket on it. So we'd like to talk briefly about this, briefly about Wheeling, and briefly about the 10-year plan. So let's start.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's start. Thank you very much. So now let's talk about a little bit about the LUMA contract. And from the beginning, let's make clear that this is not a referendum about LUMA. This is about the contract. We all know that LUMA had a very well recognized companies that form LUMA. We have ATCO in Canada, and we have Qantas in Texas. So that is not in question. The question is how the contract was put together, especially in this particular context. So this is what we're talking about in terms of the first part of this talk about modifications required for the LUMA contract. Now, the first part is transparency. And I would like to make reference to the board meeting we have yesterday on PREPA. Yesterday on PREPA, we have our January meeting. And guys, not to surprise, if you see that meeting, you will see that not even PREPA board, not even PREPA executive have access to the LUMA backup for expenditure for reimbursable expenses. That is a huge transparency issue. And when I asked Wayne Stansfield. I have been doing that since, I will say, shortly after the contract was awarded, about the issue of transparency of sharing document. He said, I'm following the contract. And my answer, and now the answer of all the board members of PREPA is, no contract can be above the law. And that's true. And this is a huge loophole in the Luma contract, my friend. No contract can be above the law. Per Puerto Rico law, all the expenses, all backup information, all the invoices, not a summary of the invoices, like they are doing in the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau webpage, not a summary, the full invoice with backup information. And of course, if there is something that requires some degree of confidentiality, maybe you can redact a sentence or two or a paragraph, but the whole invoice and reimbursable expenses need to be there, not only for the PREPA board, but for the public. And let me give you an example. Tom, you wanted to add something?
Oh no, I was just trying to agree with you. I mean, we operate under grants at the nonprofit, and if we don't, have everything I's dotted, T's crossed, then we don't get our money. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So just to give an example, that this front-end transition is $60 million that is paid to Lumen in the base of $5 million monthly. That is being paid. That is no issue. That is a base fee. The problem is that Luma, per the contract, is entitled to invoice PREPA to reimbursable expenses. And in an average from the July through December invoice, so 6 months, there had been an average in expenses above the $5 million for $7.8 million. Basically, half of it is about people, timesheets for the people that Luma hires to perform the work. There is about 150 to 200 heads or persons in Luma working in PREPA. So actually that needs to be reimbursed, but the timesheets needs to be there. They are not. Timesheets are not there. They need to be there. They are not. And the other is the reimbursables. All the companies that Luma hires, all the expenses, general expenses, I would like to say even the sneaker you buy into the gas station need to be there, and the receipt needs to be there. They are not. Right. Yesterday, as a happy medium for the PREPA board to agree to pay the invoices, they agreed to send one person to P3A, to the private partnership authority, to review those invoices. That is not enough. For Puerto Rico law, that needs to be public, and needs to be public. Tom, foundations, everything needs to be public. Public corporation needs to be public. Luma is on the administration of a public corporation that needs to be public. So that is the big loophole of this part, transparency and available of information. That needs to be fixed.
Would you accept, first of all, I think to get the reimbursements and be able to have that, would you accept in terms of full transparency or full posting online, like do it like 6 months in arrears so that everything gets posted, et cetera, but then, you do kind of 6 months. Transparency is great in a necessity. When you try and do transparency in real time, it has negative consequences for a lot of operations. But at some point, you need to keep track. I mean, have you thought about specifically how it would be done?
My response to that, Tommy, is that to be compatible with Puerto Rico law, and there needs to be a legal analysis of that. My first answer is it needs to be there. The timing can be evaluated. But the general answer is yes, it needs to be there. 6 months, it seems to be a little bit too much, but it needs to be there. And it's not there. 6 months passed, nothing is there. And yesterday, after 6 months, this sounds kind of funny. Luma and P3 gave permission to the one who is paying, who is a representative for PREPA, to see that information. That is not right. That is not just right. Just needs to be available. Now, the second point is, and this is an example, just an example, that a general I would say, cleanup, a general check that needs to be done on the Luma contract. And this is just a good example of it. This is not the only thing that needs to be fixed, but it's just a good example. Now, section 3.9 of the contract basically says that the term of the contract of Luma, which is 15 years, needs to be in agreement with the economic life of the property. And the economic life of the property is the transmission and distribution wires, substation, and all that make up the transmission and distribution system. So on day one, when the contract starts, you need to review that commencement date and needs to be in line with the economic life. In fact, Revenue Procedure 2017-13, which is the one that applies, is an IRS bulletin or regulation, however you want to call it. It's established that it needs to be 80% of the economic life. So as the beginning of the contract, let's say that equation of 80% the economic life is 12 years. So the contract was signed by 15 years. So you need to pay Luma $100 million a year. Yes, $100 million a year. For every year you shorten the contract of Luma, which is required by section 3.9. That simply should not be there. I believe that, yes, we need to be in compliance with 2017-13, but the $100 million a month, that seems to be too much. There should be some sort of compensation, but $105 million is Luma's base fee annually. So that is something that is not right when you see it, and also it doesn't help to see this thing kind of a good faith moving forward. It doesn't perceive as a good faith contract when you see that for every contract that it's short-term because of the IRS requirement, you need to pay Luma $100 million a year. That doesn't seem to be right. That need to be fixed.
Yeah, this seems like a manifest error, right? I mean, you've basically done something not looking at the effects and the implications, and this gets caught into the termination clause. And if this happens, Luma would could rightly argue that it's not their fault, and because of the way that the contract is written, anything that's not their fault is effectively PREPA's fault, which would mean that they would be entitled to be paid. And this doesn't seem like the intent of the parties. But you don't want to have to take it to a judge if it comes up and have them rule that it's manifest error. Best to fix it.
Exactly, and also this is not the termination clause. I just wanted to be clear. This is in addition to the termination clause, which is making it even worse. The termination clause, it has a percentage on the annex of the contract at a percentage of the year, which you terminate the first 3 years is about 90% or 80%. So this is a termination clause. This is above the termination clause, which make it even more difficult to swallow. So this is just an example that things that need to be cleaned up and should not be there. Mm-hmm. Now, section 7.5 basically says that you need to advance Luma's on cash flow so they can manage PREPA. And let me have a parenthesis here. This contract is not about Luma just to do the operation of maintenance of the TND system. Section 5.2 and 5.6 basically gave Luma all the authority of PREPA. So what this contract does, not the law, not Act 120, not Act 29, not Act 17, the contract. What the contract does, basically, it transfers of the powers of PREPA to Luma. So basically, through the contract, believe it or not, Luma is vested through all the powers of PREPA and authority of PREPA and needs to operate of PREPA. Because of that, you need a huge credit line of almost let's say $1 billion, to be exactly 904 million you need for the operation. And the contract says that the government, that money needs to be advanced to Luma. Now, in December 17, the Puerto Rico FOMB, the Financial Management Oversight Board, the FOMB, issued a document that basically says that the government of Puerto Rico needs to give a credit line or a loan to PREPA, so PREPA give those monies to Luma, so they can move forward with the operation and finance the operation of Luma. That's too much. And I believe this is kind of a conceptual error of the role of Luma. I believe that very few people in Puerto Rico can be against, and I'm not against, let's put that clear, to break the PREPA inbreeding. PREPA suffer of a great deal of inbreeding. The management on PREPA is raised on PREPA. Their only job basically has been PREPA. PREPA is the only power company on the island, and there is a huge inbreeding, and that is a problem. So nobody can be against, like Puerto Rico did in the 1940s and 1950s, to bring the greatest minds around the world and help to transform the Puerto Rico electric system. That was done with Pablo Casals, and now we are proud to have the Pablo Casals Festival every year. So I believe that with the electric system is the same. Puerto Rico is a pioneer, and we need to break that inbreeding. But, you know, through a contract, not a law, not anything else, but a contract, to vest a private service company, of all the powers of a utility, that has a lot of problems. And the first problem is financing. You need to give almost $1 billion to finance that operation. That's a huge problem that needs to be fixed. So that is another loophole on the Luma contract. And that's just a taste for you to have a kind of a taste of the things that needs to be fixed. But the base problem is that through a contract, you transform a service corporation to become a utility. That is hectic, that needs to be addressed, that needs to be fixed.
So how would you recommend that people address this? And I think, you know, moving the working capital issue, because whether PREPA still has a degree of decision making in relation to that, or whether that, you know, you and I have talked about this. Maybe you do it where the employees sit in one place, and so the responsibility of that, and then so you wouldn't need to create as much working capital within Luma. Some of it could stay within PREPA, but you honestly, I think you'd still need almost $1 billion from the government to PREPA. It just wouldn't be all the way into Luma. There's some question about the working capital for the fuel, right? So a lot of that is tied up in fuel. Some of it is relating to employee expenses and operations, and a very large amount of that, about 300 to 350 million, is definitely new money required to cover the reimbursable aspects of working capital under the FEMA money that's coming in. But
just to clarify your point, in June 1st, Luma becomes GridCo, and PREPA board and anyone of PREPA has nothing to say on it. Only the P3A authority or the private partnership authority will have certain degree of supervision under Luma. PREPA will have none. And that is a huge, huge loophole that needs to be fixed. How can that be? How many people you have on the P3A? 4 people? They don't have the expertise. I know even that may not be even their original intention, but that is a problem that is not identified now. On the future, it will hit back strong, and it will cause severe problems that need to be addressed now before it becomes a real problem.
Yeah, I think maybe so that people on here understand a little bit better, and I'm certainly not an expert on this as well, but yeah, the intent is to hollow out PREPA in terms of the operations. And as Tomás said, to change the culture and really make it so, PREPA ends up, what's left of PREPA, if you like, is really kind of an asset ownership management shell, and eventually will transpose some of the generation and other things. But it's also, in effect, when the contract ends, it's an entity that these things would actually come back to, or would be, kind of reconcessioned or something else after. But P3 has taken over, like the public-private partnerships within the government has basically taken over that role as the owner's representative, if you want to think. But Thomas is right. They don't have the people to actually supervise this, and the way that the contract is set up, it's their responsibility to make sure that all these things are done, not PREPA, not the PREPA board. Yeah, so what's the question? What do? Do you actually take some of the accounting and management and compliance folks from PREPA who aren't particularly well liked or respected at this point and move them into P3 in order to do this? And the other conversation we've had, Tomás, is that the contract, the way that it's maybe not the way that it's written exactly, but the way that people have talked about it in P3 and even to some extent Luma, cuts out in some aspects the role of the regulator, which also must,
Yes, that is an important issue. But let me say what will be a solution to this. And this solution has applied in many jurisdictions throughout the US and internationally. If you have a vertical utility, you unbundle that vertical utility. And in the case of PREPA, you will have to have Puerto Rico Transmission Distribution Corporation. And then you can put Luma or whoever fits there to manage that corporation. In that manner, you kind of break the inbreeding, you bring a new management, you bring expert management around the world, and you put that to work. But that's the way that should be done, rather than having a service company like Luma that was created as a service company to become a utility. Actually, you unbundle the utility and you put those experts to manage the utility. That will be a logical way of thinking. And I believe that will be a middle ground that many people could agree on. And now let me talk about the regulator. That's very important, Tom, because many people could think, well, the regulator will take care of. Well, my friends, not necessarily. Puerto Rico enacted in June 2018 Act 120, which is now normally as a privatization law. Basically, what that Puerto Rico law did was basically took many powers and authority of the regulator just to move this contract forward. And let me give you an idea. In every jurisdiction, most of the jurisdiction where you have a strong energy commission, a strong bureau, and a strong regulator, basically, if you have a contract of this size, a contract of this magnitude, you have a regulatory proceeding, which is public, which is called an adjudicative proceeding, in which you have public participation, and you spend between 4 to, let's say, 5, 6 months evaluating that proposal, evaluating that contract, because that impacts all the customer classes. You will have residential customers that will have to say something. You will have commercial customer. You will have industrial customer. You will have everybody that will have their part to say. And after that, the commission get together and they make a decision on how this is moving forward. In Puerto Rico, all that was erased, was taken out of the responsibility of the regulator, and only allowing, and this is sort of funny, an energy certificate. Yes, you're listening right. An energy certificate that the Bureau only have 30 days to award that energy certificate, and was a yes or no decision. My friend, that's not right. That need to be fixed. But that is not, if you think that is the only one, the only thing, that is not. You know, let me finish on that, and then you can add something, but this is very important. You know that every electric power company needs to get a certification from the regulator. This same law says, you know what, after you get your energy certificate, your certification of an electric power company will be automatic. And the Energy Commission, I'm reading for the law, the certificate for electric power company should be automatic without the need for the Bureau, the Puerto Rico regulator, to act on it. My friend, if this is right, tell me how to fix it. This is so wrong. And not only that, but it put a stain on the process. How could you eliminate not only the evaluation of the contract, but the evaluation of the certificate of the as an electric power company? And to tell you more, the Energy Bureau has a regulation, which is regulation 8705, that every single power company that wants to produce over 1 megawatt needs to go through that very stringent process. And Luma was just waved through all that. So that needs to be corrected. That put a stain on the process. That is not just right.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, I'll play devil's advocate here for a second, but you should know that I come down on your side in all of the transparency stuff, as you know. We have extenuating circumstances, right? We have a bankruptcy, we have a rapid transformation, we've got an economy that you know perfectly well, since you were formerly with ICSE, and so you've been arguing this point for a long time to move faster and do things right. They just decided to skip out the part where they made sure they were doing things right, and oh well, this is too much trouble. It's extenuating circumstances. We need to get the Lumen contract. We need to get this changed. We need to get the debt reorganized. Speed, and speed is important. It is absolutely important, but it doesn't justify what we're talking about here, right? Stipulate that you must have public hearings and you must get everything done in 3 months, right? But at least go through the process of making sure that people are aware of what's required. But I think on the other side, the FOMB, the government of Puerto Rico, and everyone else have done a very poor job of communicating what the costs are associated with this continuous living in a gray area with the debt issue not resolved and everything else. The cost of this has been lifted from the people of Puerto Rico, partly by the stay allowed by the bankruptcy regulation. But there's a very poor communication there. I don't know that it would change a lot of minds, but
I agree. The Bureau needs to be more. They need to put pamphlets out. They need to put beyond because they are doing a fine work, let me tell you. Sometimes they fail in some areas, but in general terms, especially in this, the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, they are doing such a fine work. Is a pioneer work, and they're doing just fine, but they need to communicate. They need to put things in people's language so people can understand. But let me tell you something. When you need to make sure things happen, you don't eliminate the process. You constrain the process to a time frame. Yeah. For example, you could say that the contract evaluation should not be more than 70 days or 90 days or 120 days. But you don't eliminate the process and substitute that by an energy certificate that sounds very funny. And to the regulators that I have talked throughout the US, it smells bad. This doesn't, why given such a preference to this contract? Doesn't smell right. So you put a time frame, you will say you need to comply with this process within 90 days. You know that usually, Tom, about regulation, this can take a year. So you frame it and you say you need to develop this process in 90 days or 120 days. So it's framed. Both the contract evaluation and the certification as an EPC, as an electric power company, not eliminated and having an automatic process. So this is something that really needs to be fixed. Now,
no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been involved in at least a dozen privatizations and 2 nationalizations around the world, and it doesn't happen in a matter of months. It can take a year, it can take 2 years building the regulation, legislation, talking to the public, yeah, it doesn't go on in a smoke-filled room, to use a phrase. Yeah.
And now that you mentioned that, because this is the precedent, right? Luma just presented their initial budget, and they did this last week in some hearings, public hearings at the Bureau. Their initial budget and the system remediation plan. And you know the scheduled date, they presented 3 months for all the proceedings. When you start wrong, you gave the utility or the operator a bad impression and everything runs wrong. How can you run a budget that is similar to a rate case in 3 months? That's not right. If I were the people from Luma, I would be very, very, very careful, because that doesn't seem right, and it puts a lot of shadows on the process. And the system remediation plan that put the basis of the transformation parallel to the budget 3 months. So that is how I say the major problem here is to transform a service company like Luma was intended to be as a utility. That complicated thing, that put a lot of roadblocks and shadows on the process. So the best way to fix this is to unbundle PREPA, create a new transmission and distribution corporation, and then get Luma or get the best minds of the world to be part of that management. That is the way to fix it. But let me tell you what the Bureau is doing. The Bureau is doing something very, very good, is that in 2016, they created a proceeding that was called the performance of PREPA. And that proceeding was intended kind of to really create some metrics for PREPA, to put some auditors within PREPA and straighten PREPA toward standards. Now, when the commission was transformed to the Energy Bureau, they did not follow that procedure, but they create a new one very similar, which is MI 2019-0007. And in that proceeding, they put a bunch of metrics, a bunch of standards that PREPA needs to guide. And that is kind of a drawback in case, and that is very good from the commission, if something gets wrong or delayed with anything, either the unbundling or the current contract is that, in my opinion, it should be the unbundling. The current contract will not, it will be a problem sooner or later. But if something gets wrong, the commission get this proceeding, MI 2017-007, will put some performance metrics to PREPA that really helps to move forward PREPA in that direction. So that's some credit to give to the Energy Bureau.
Yeah, actually, that sort of leads to a question that I know that I've had, and so amongst the things, and like this, right, setting the benchmarks, and then the codicil of this is the ability to penalize PREPA, right, charge them fines and other things if they're not developing things on time, if they haven't responded and done the interconnection, right, that's one of them for distributed energy. That was enshrined actually in the energy policy law, which is unusual, but you'd have to understand the history in Puerto Rico to understand that. This is sort of like taking it out of one pocket and putting it into another, right? As long as it's all publicly owned. So, when I hear them talking about, they just recently approved a 0.8 cents increase in the tariff until March. And the governor has said, Pierre Luisi said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. We're gonna stomp that out." Well, technically, right now he shouldn't have any control over that. But it's still the same thing. If you keep denying rate increases and PREPA keeps spending more money on whatever it is, debt, Luma, et cetera, technically it just comes right back to the people of Puerto Rico, right? So somebody has to come in and bail this out. So you're either paying for it in the lack of performance and higher costs, either through higher tariffs, which one could argue is a tax on the poor, or in the form of increased taxes or less state spending on other things because you have to prop up the PREPA. Yeah.
Yes, well, let me mention something. What creates this national discussion we have in Puerto Rico for the last entire week and part of this week was not the periodic revision, the quarterly revision of the fuel rider and the energy purchase right. That was not the issue. The issue was that for the previous quarter, when the case was submitted in September 2020, PREPA submitted to the Bureau cost of diesel of $102 from the San Juan plant and $76 for Palo Seco plant, when the world market was in 40-something dollars. And even PREPA personnel accepted that the highest that they could have figured that to be 50-something dollars, but they were submitting to the Bureau with an increment on the rate of 2.75 cents per kilowatt hour, which basically was 16% of the current rate. So that whole thing was that put a lot of doubt on the process. The Energy Bureau froze that rider increase and basically is currently under evaluation. The Energy Bureau put an auditor in PREPA to investigate not only this past year, but the last 3 years. But because here we're talking, there is some mismanagement on the inventory of fuel, and that is a serious matter. That's what I had said before, that PREPA needs to break the inbreeding. We need management that when they see, hey, we are on the middle of COVID, $100, don't submit this to the Bureau. Let's review it here. Let's not make a national issue. Let's not affect the process. Let's save the institutionality of the process. But PREPA did not do that. They submitted over $100 barrel cost of diesel to the Bureau. So that was the issue, Tom, just for the audience to be clear of what the issue was. It was not the quarterly 0.8 increase. It was the whole process behind it that create the problem.
Is that an indication? I mean, because I know kind of the way that these things are often like added up. Is this an indication of physical theft and removal of oil? Because you get certain deliveries and you put it into inventory and you pay something for those deliveries. But then when it's kind of like if you run a bar and you want to match your costs on a particular night, and you want to find out whether the bartender is pouring heavy, right? You look at the bottles and you make an assessment, and then you say, okay, well, we've generated this amount of electricity, and we've used, we were supposed to use this much oil, but we used this much oil, because that's the difference between what went in and what's in there now.
Yeah. And especially when that happened on diesel, not in bunker C. So that's why the Energy Bureau did an audit on PREPA. Now, the Energy Bureau, now let me say this, this is very important. The Energy Bureau in their order says that they believe there was an accounting error. And when you review the whole docket, it seems to be an accounting error. But you never know. You never know. So maybe this will help to have the process aseptic. Yeah. And this is important of having a good management. But when you have a management that see this irregularity, you say, no, bring this back to finance. Let's talk to the Bureau. We'll not make the filing this week. We'll need to fix this first. They did not did that. They transferred that to the Bureau. That was a huge mistake. And that was what created all this hustle, all this discussion that took most of last week and this week on national television, all newspapers and so on.
Cool. Well, hey, do you want to move on? We spent a lot of time on Luma, and now we've kind of talked about the performance. If there's more that you want to do, we could talk about wheeling or one of the other topics. Yeah.
Wheeling was the next topic, and I have it right here.
Yeah, well, we have some experience with this recently. So.
Yeah, we are tuned. We are just tuned. So wheeling. Now, I just said that the Energy Bureau had have a great outcome of this on their performance, but this wheeling thing that we're going to talk now is a kind of a foul ball. They need to fix this. They're not doing wheeling properly. And let me say why. Now, since the wheeling regulation and a little bit about the microgrid regulation, the wheeling tariff, the wheeling rate is not only for the big companies, for the big industrial company. That is not the case anymore. The wheeling rate is a case that for anyone, any person or any corporation that generate over 1 megawatt, and that is not much. That can be in a small municipality, it can be on a small microgrid, just 1 megawatt. They are entitled to use the wheeling rate, kind of lease the infrastructure of PREPA to make that microgrid feasible and make it possible. As you know, in a microgrid, you need the generation, but you also need the infrastructure. You need the wires. And basically, this regulation plus other regulation of the Bureau, Regulation 9028, which is the microgrid regulation, Regulation 8701, that basically entitle and define a service power company as anyone in Puerto Rico that generate over 1 megawatt on the distribution grid. So that's the definition of a microgrid. So wheeling tariffs are entitled to that. Wheeling tariffs are entitled to microgrids. So what the Energy Bureau did when they were doing the unbundling. So let's give a little history. The Energy Bureau approved in December 2019 the wheeling regulation. That basically was a regulation, was complete, but did not have the wheeling tariff. For the wheeling tariff, they have this another proceeding, which is the unbundling proceeding. And on the unbundling proceeding, they are creating the unbundling wheeling rate, which is actually what a power company will pay to PREPA to use the wires. And like I just said before, a power company is defined here, an electric power company, of someone that generates over 1 megawatt. So it can be really small, a microgrid. So the Energy Bureau say, when we're doing the unbundling, we're going to use the standard cost of service, the cost of service study, of course. But in addition, the Energy Bureau says, we're going to analyze a rate that will be, and listen well, the current PREPA rate, what you pay to PREPA right now, less a credit for the fuel rider and the energy purchase rider, if they actually give to you that credit. So in so many words, if you want to have a wheeling tariff, you need to pay your full PREPA rate, then have a credit for fuel rider and have a credit for the energy purchase rider, and that will be your wheeling rate. That's not right. That should not be right. That is unthinkable. And let me tell you something. I know very good people that is behind this reasoning, and I know them and I respect them. I know people that really want the best for Puerto Rico. This needs to be rethinked over. I know that people may think that we need to go incremental. We cannot move all these changes at the same time. So let's be honest. Let's say no wheeling for now. Not trying to do this and say, let's put this wheeling tariff that will be actually the PREPA rate and a credit if it's actually granted to you. That will be a wrong signal. It's just a wrong signal that it will create a lot of confusion. And it's not just right. This should be done by cost of service, and it can be restrained. And let me tell you something, Tom. On the regulation, the Energy Bureau says, don't get confused. This is not an open access, non-discriminatory system. The Bureau will have control, and that's fine. But you cannot put this PREPA rate to be the wheeling rate. That's not just right. You can have control. Of course, you need to have control, but it needs to be done in a way that is more transparent. And cost of service is the way to do it. If you want to regulate it further, go ahead, but don't make it beyond the cost of service.
Yeah, Yeah, I know that's exactly right. I think the other thing to point out, which we talked about last week, was that Puerto Rico is very quickly going to be at the forefront of the policies and other things around wheeling, retail wheeling, other wheeling. It's not used as much as it's talked about in many other jurisdictions. It's allowed. You've got markets like California and New York, and then the guys connected to the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio grid out there that do kind of high voltage wheeling, if you want to call it, or contracts for differences. The sort of smaller scale neighborhood wheeling, the things that we're talking about here, really helping grow distributed energy. These are really new concepts. It's not that they haven't been thought of, but they haven't been put into place in a lot of areas. So it's not like PREP can actually just go and copy what somebody has decided to do in another jurisdiction, because they haven't. Puerto Rico is going to be very much on the leading edge of this, but it's being able. Let's put it this way. Think about community solar in Puerto Rico, right? The definition of that basically is, you're wheeling maybe through a local grid, et cetera. You're trying to get solar into people who can't have solar on their roofs. In other markets, they've got sophisticated means of setting up retail sales. I myself belong to a community choice aggregation for solar in New York. These things aren't really available in Puerto Rico, and they may become there. And if PREP wants to exercise complete, lasting control, which I think they'll get tired of very quickly, then you can build these things in there and build them out. But it's not going to be the sort of dynamic, let's invest in local infrastructure and really create that resiliency that we all want to see interrelated. So this is a very important area, and I'm glad that more people are beginning to recognize the importance. It's one of those things that kind of lives in the shadows, but can have an outsized impact on resiliency and energy justice and all these things we want to see more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, one last point. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but I just want to talk one thing. It will be very quick, and then we close. You know that PREPA received this over $10 billion from FEMA. They need to do this 10-year plan, and something happened there that it shouldn't happen, and is that the plan that PREPA prepared for FEMA for the 10-year plan, it has some mistakes. It was just totally aligned with the IRP, with Integrated Resources Plan. That was not the issue. That is not the issue. Every plan has mistakes, and especially on this plan, you can correct it every 90 days. The problem was that in a hearing in the Bureau on January 11th, PREPA full management and one consultant nationally recognized went there and said, Section 404 of the Stanford Act allows PREPA to use fossil generation as emergency generation as is needed, as any residential customer and any commercial customer has their power diesel plant on their backyard. Tom, you cannot imagine the faces of the commissioners when that particular person says so. And you know what happened? The Energy Bureau issued an order just this week, and it says, it says, PREPA should immediately abstain from using studies and plans as collateral attack. This is a very strong language from the regulator, as collateral attack to the approved IRT and modified action plan. This is so wrong. This should not ever happen. That's why I mentioned about the inbreeding. If you have senior management there, they could stop. When this consultant nationwide came with this crazy idea, you need to stop them. You cannot bring them forward because of their expertise and so on. No, Puerto Rico has a law, which is Act 17, which provided the Bureau to move forward with this IRP process. and we have a legally binding IRP. You cannot just came with some theory. What should have been done is PREPA should make a motion to the Bureau and ask the question, not in a public hearing, just say that they want to basically bypass the approved IRP. So
yeah,
I believe that covers the latest issues here that we had in Puerto Rico. Interesting topics here on the island.
No, that's right. I was there for online for a good portion of the meeting, and I couldn't see all of the faces, and I missed the part in the beginning, but the argument kept going on throughout the public.
Yes.
And what I understood is they actually argued, the expert argued that that this wasn't the purview of the regulator, that it was recovery funds, and that they could spend them any way that they wanted. It's like. Maybe before the IRP.
You just don't do that in front of a regulator.
And the regulator pushed back, right? I mean, he cited 404, but I think that Puerto Rico deliberately went forward under 427 or 428, which allowed effectively to use the funds for equivalent but updated new technologies or different technologies, provided that the state takes the risk of cost overruns, right? So it was wrong on that count anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever is not in line. And let me tell you something. When we were on the December board meeting of PREPA, I warned them. I say, remember, you need to be fully compliant on the FEMA plan with the IRP.
Yeah.
And the problem with PREPA basically is that, again, you need senior management. You need gray hair, Tom. Gray hair. You need gray hair on PREPA. You need gray hair on PREPA. We are doing something in PREPA that very few utilities are doing around the world, which is moving seriously and constantly through the goal of dependence on renewables, because that's the fuel we have in Puerto Rico. We have the sun, we have the wind. In Maria, we have a lot of hardship with power, and so we need to have a reliable system. We need to have a resilient system, and I'm glad we're moving forward with that. And challenging that is not just right.
Yeah, if you got a couple more minutes, I think there's a couple of questions in the chat we can take up. One is from Elizabeth Arnold. So Elizabeth is actually I think Elizabeth is still with the DOE Foundation doing a fellowship. She asked whether you expect the administration and relevant Puerto Rico agencies to do more on the public education and outreach so that the public can understand and be aware of these energy policy developments.
Yes, and hi, Elizabeth. Nice to say hi. Yes, I mean, one of the major problems that happened last week when we have this adjustment on the riders of fuel rider and energy rider is that the Energy Bureau, for example, they are doing their work, but they have these orders of 24 pages in this technical matter that maybe the few of us that are here on this webinar can understand, and maybe some other people can really understand. You need to put that on the language that the people can understand, so they got confident on the system, they got confident on the process. They understand that they have a regulator that is for the public interest, that is working actually for them. There are mistakes, of course, there have been mistakes like the Wheeling thing we mentioned and some others, like the San Juan 5 and 6 project and some others. But in general terms, they are there and they need to explain their job. Of course, yes, Elizabeth, that needs to be done, especially the Energy Bureau.
Yeah, good point. And then Nico Bilod from Dex Grid is asking that if LUMA is doing work on the transmission lines, what would you, and I think by this he means high voltage transmission, what would you expect to happen on the distribution side? And I think he's particularly curious whether there's going to be more leeway offered to municipalities to get involved with the grid infrastructure at the distribution level. Like, I mean, I think what Nico is originally referring to is that certain of the municipalities, and I know Villalba was one after the hurricane, and
Yes.
they were granted, actually the USDA actually called them a utility so that they could loan them money. But they actually hired people, engineers, people went up with training, with certification, and started reconnecting local distribution lines, et cetera. So, I mean, I think maybe that's the kind of thing he's referring to.
And Nico, nice to say hi. Nice, like your question. That is the problem of the wheeling regulation. If you want to put a microgrid, for example, that you could, even with Luma, you could put a microgrid. But with the proposal of the Energy Bureau, the wheeling rate, the wheeling tariff will be so high that you have two options. Basically, have much higher tariff than PREPA in your microgrid that will attract very few customers, or build your own distribution infrastructure. And that will be a real challenge. So yes, that could happen, but the Energy Bureau, like I said before, need to have wheeling rates for municipalities, for microgrids, to lease the infrastructure from PREPA at the cost of service, not at a full rate of PREPA plus a credit. So correct. Yes, it can be done, but it needs to be done right.
Yeah, I think, I mean, actually, if you don't know, Nico and DexGrid and the guys from the Tayaboa microgrid have basically projects down there. And I'm not going to explain, but we worked with them in the pre-cap program in the first cohort, and the project down there, we actually took I'll say we, the royal we, but they took the steps of taking a look at the possibility of effectively creating a campus effect, right? By limiting to one interconnection point with PREPA at the main site of the main generation, but then running lines across private property to neighbors to connect up and run their systems, and also talked with the municipality about running down municipal rights of way in order to connect up different barrios. And there's a cost to it, but it's in some ways it's not as hard or as expensive as you think. And if the alternative is, you have to pay PREPA's full rate, then it's pretty easy to actually justify the cost over, a longer period of time. The tricky part, one of the tricky parts that I've identified actually Nico identified, is that you can do this. The tricky part is if you're crossing rights of way that PREPA already has, right? And even though technically the municipality owns those rights of way and allows PREPA and can put different people through them, that's a holdup, right? That's a whole, we have to deal with PREPA. PREPA comes into the equation. PREPA could be obstructive. And so, you actually just remember talking to these guys, we had a map out and we were looking at where things went and like, how do we do this? How much can we do without crossing PREPA?
But Tom, also you may want to avoid the double infrastructure to get to the same point.
Absolutely.
You want to avoid the double dipping, because if you have FEMA funds just to rebuild PREPA infrastructure, which is mainly distribution, and then you will have this municipality that will be forced to get some other federal funds to bypass that infrastructure because the charge that the Energy Bureau is placing are extremely high, unbearable, then building to infrastructure, it will be crazy, it will not work. The best thing to do is to do cost of service, wheeling rate. That is the best way to go.
Yeah. Well, I think as I pointed out, if you actually did a study on the local area, depending upon the condition and the types of generation and demand in that area, you could actually get a credit, if you did it right, for actually putting power onto the system in a consistent way, because it stabilizes that. And if you're at the toward the end of a line, or other ways that my this is where my engineering by osmosis kind of runs out. But this is what the guys who I know have degrees and doctorates tell me. It's like it's odd, but this is wheeling in other cases or integrating different groups into lines, especially can be in effect a profit center for a utility that's judged on the basis of rate of return regulation, right? Because so much of that is determined by performance, and of course, if they can, there's a spread. It's not based on performance, cost of return, but how much you get to keep of the excess that you generate potentially by performance of the rate. Allows you to consistently overperform as a public utility. They do that by balancing the timing of expenditure. And so if you don't have to make capital expenditures, or if you don't have to generate quite as much to keep a local distribution system stable, in effect, local generation is effectively giving you free, local grid services because they're on and they're stabilizing it. You save money. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to unravel, but you can
supplement. Yeah. You can complement. For example, if the grid gets to this point with your funds, you can build the extra mile. But double dipping is the thing that should be avoided at all costs.
Exactly. Great. So we have run a little bit over time. I think, did Nico have another question? Would wheeling allow for resiliency in case of hurricane? If the grid goes down, will the microgrid be able to insulate itself?
Yes.
That's more of, in theory, yes, right? It depends. It depends upon the physical construction of that grid. If you're using the lines, right, and you're connecting into the grid and you're putting it in, you're actually feeding into the local grid. But if you can't throw a breaker and isolate that or island that area with your generation, then it's not going to do you a lot of good to be putting the power onto the local line. So it depends upon the way that the infrastructure is developed. Yeah.
If it complies with the microgrid regulation, the answer will be a sound yes. The problem will be the quality of the infrastructure. If we have a infrastructure that has been renewed or rebuilt, I will say that there are pretty much good chances that you can overcome a hurricane or a storm and isolate your microgrid from the rest of the grid. Yes, it will all depend on the condition of the grid. But in general terms, and based on the current regulation, the answer will be yes in most of the cases.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting kind of, I guess, engineering and policy question. But I guess, if you were making a proposal to do kind of a community microgrid, you wouldn't necessarily be paying or serving everybody within that community under normal circumstances. But if the idea was to isolate that, and you were building that, I suppose you could propose to PREPA that they create 2 breakers, right, at certain locations that you would pay for, so that in an emergency situation or in a situation where the rest of the grid goes down, you could open up those breakers and your generation would continue to go to the neighborhood. You may need to balance that.
And you need to remember this is a process. If you want to do a microgrid, you need to do filing on the Bureau, and all those loose ends, normally they are addressed.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't really seen anybody who kind of got to the point where they thought, oh, I know, we'll also pay for the breakers. that's not there yet. Cool. All right. Well, hey, this has been fun. I'm glad that we were able to get in. I want to thank everyone who's here, and especially our guest, Tomás. I hope you come back and visit with us again, maybe later in the year when we had a few more things going on. I was hoping to announce who was going to be next month's Energy Transformation Hour, but I don't have a confirmation yet. I've been looking at a couple of different ways. We may just see what goes on in the next week and pivot and find someone who's going to be as topical as Tomás. So with that, I want to thank everybody, and we'll sign off. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.